Let's go back to what led up to your announcement that you're going to retire.
Right.
You just thought, I'm retiring?
Get a replacement.
Let's get a replacement. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Keep sharing about how this was new.
The best way to explain it is I got triggered a lot internally. Yeah. It was way more than that. It was actually changing me in the process.
Hey everybody, Chris Macky here. Welcome to VCCLife, a podcast for and by the Vineyard Community Church in St. Louis, Missouri. This podcast is a space for a church in transition. As we navigate change, we believe God is calling us into something new, a fresh way of thinking about faith, community, and what it means to be the church. We're leaning in, listening, and experimenting with what it looks like for Jesus to lead us. Join us as we wrestle, reflect, and step forward together into God's unfolding story.
So over the last few years, I've had so many conversations with you, and others about what God's doing. I was so encouraged and inspired that for each of them, I walked away thinking, I really wish I would have recorded that for others to be able to hear it. So that's kind of the background of this, and the inspiration for this podcast is let's sort of have those conversations again.
Right.
But we'll structure it a little bit. We've got mics, we got all of this stuff. Let's record our conversation so that people can be inspired.
So this is spying in on our breakfast we had together that we talk out. That's where I practiced that. Yeah.
So actually, David, I did record everything you said and all of those breakfasts that you thought was just between the two of us.
Yeah.
So let's do this in narrative form. We're going to kind of do it chronological and just go back a few years and ask the question, what was God doing in you? What was God doing in the church? What did you see God doing around you? So let's go back to what led up to your announcement that you're going to retire, a few years ago. Obviously, you didn't wake up one day and say, I'm going to announce this.
Yeah.
So there was some buildup. So what was that? Give us the context. What was going on in the church and in you and in others?
Well, we were pretty aware that transition was going to happen sooner or later, pretty quickly, because I'm getting old, right? And Vineyard has a lot of people my age, so I'm watching a lot of my friends transition their churches out to different places. And so this really was something that I was on my radar. Probably 2018 or so, I began more seriously looking at okay, what's our next step and who should be brought in and what should it look like, or who in the church is going to, take over my place. And so those things we started looking at back then.
So you assumed that at that point,
right?
You just thought, I'm retiring.
Get a replacement.
Let's get a replacement. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Right.
So, in the Vineyard model, this is a senior pastor led. It's still with counsel. And so, we try to have great counsel. But the bottom line is on a senior pastor led model, it's kind of, I'm the guy who's supposed to do the vision and lots of other things, some of that I'm really good at and some I'm really bad at. And
let's talk about those now.
Yeah.
All the things you're really bad at now.
Yeah. So I think that's where I realized at this point, we were looking for somebody who would be in that spot. And so we knew if it was someone on the inside, if someone from our church, then that's a little easier. And so that didn't look like that was anybody who was already in leadership, didn't feel like, hey, I think I'm the person or whatever. So we began looking outside, maybe a Vineyard person that would come in, and we'd have, 3 or 4 years for them to establish relationship and to build connection and authority with our leadership that's already presently in place. And we kind of went down that road for a period of time. But it wasn't very long when we started going that road. We just didn't have a right feeling about it. That's the best way to describe it. It just didn't. It feels like we were doing what we were told we should be doing, but we didn't feel peaceful about it.
Yeah, that's not wrong.
No,
right? There's nothing wrong with that.
Mate.
Unethical. That's.
I hope not.
We've
been doing it for a lot of years, and it's been working pretty good.
Just the assumption that this is what we do. This is how it works.
Right.
This is how churches run for decades, century, whatever.
A lot of really good churches.
A lot of really good churches. And so there was nothing necessarily wrong with that thought. But then expand on that a little bit. There came a point where you just said, this isn't right. Tell us what kind of internally was happening in conversations.
Now, there's a lot now that I look back in retrospect. Even before COVID, I had this image, which I don't know, vision sounds pretty big, but it was almost that, a very clear picture that God kept bringing to mind when I prayed. And here's the picture. We were in the parking lot on the Sunday morning, and the church was smoldering and torn down. The bricks were gone. And then someone came in. We had 200 people just standing around looking to, that were part of our church, and just talking and waiting to figure out what to do. And someone told us, hey, you don't even own the building. And it was just this weird feeling. It was just a setup. And then I felt like God asked the question, what do you have? And that was that was a question I had to decide: what kind of disciples that we built that we could lose the whole building, lose everything we have, and we would still be a very healthy church. And that's what that I knew that instantly what that meant.
Yeah.
So that just caused me to think about, are we discipling well? Are we helping people really get connected to Jesus the head and be the unique part of it that they play in the body? And that caused me to begin thinking that a lot. So that was part of it. And then we also just got to a point where we started realizing that, as I thought about, I love my job. I think I have some of the best team around me.
For sure.
All my weaknesses get covered by people who are so much better than I am, make me look really good. But the reality of it is, I had to ask the question, is this a job that I would want other people to be in, right?
Okay.
Now, I know I was called to this. I've loved my job, but I began thinking, man, there's some things that are pretty hard about this senior pastor thing. So that caused me to begin thinking. And then when we found out we don't have that inside person and we began searching outside the church, it just caused me to think, is this good? That's kind of what caused me to start the journey of is there a different way of looking at this?
Yeah. Yeah. You start asking questions like, are we doing this right? Are we doing this God's way? That opens up an entire journey.
Right.
That we've been on.
Right.
It's humble and bold,
Or
because,
crazy. No.
Or, I'm trying to be nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so there we are. You're thinking, maybe this isn't the right way to go, just to bring somebody else in.
Right.
Take us to the next step. Who are you talking to in the church? What were those conversations like? What was God doing? Were they on board with you? Was this like a shock to them? Was this like you convincing them for 2 years? What?
No, I think at that point, I'd say what I'm really encouraged about, our leadership has owned the church and been alongside of me at levels that are, I couldn't have made it without the team around me. And so they're not like people who just give me thoughts. They understand the church. They understand what I go through because I bring them into all that stuff. And so they understand what senior pastor level stuff's like because I'm close enough to them. And they also just love the church. And so we kind of all thought of this together. And we thought, well, okay, so we did make, I'm not sure if we made a decision or I made a decision in my mind. I don't want to bring in an outside person.
Yeah.
I just didn't feel comfortable with it. I didn't feel right about it. So, but I had no idea what that meant at the time.
Why didn't you feel right about it? What was it about that thought that gave you pause?
Well, it wasn't that, like you said, it wasn't that model is wrong in a church. I have so many of my friends have that model and it's weren't great. Our church was operating that way. I think God used it and God directed us well, all those sort of things. So I'm not idealistic in a new form of a structure of leadership, but what I think was we had a great group of leaders who loved the church at levels that were like calling, and they knew the church. They had been tested. They knew everything. And I've also been an area leader for a long time, so I've had many, many transitions I've watched, very up close, right?
In other churches.
And I know that transition is a painful thing for churches, especially if you have the senior pastor who planted the church, right? So because of that, I knew that if we brought someone from the outside, unless God just did something that I've never seen before, we would have a huge shift in some of the values of our church. To some degree, the vision of the pastor will be different. And even to the point that I would even consider stepping out of the church for that pastor to succeed. And so when you start getting that level, you start realizing my desire to stay in the church and still function in the church, is that wrong or right? We have this great leadership team. Shouldn't that be prioritized? So that's kind of where we started with.
Yeah, that's great. So that's discernment. Am I hearing you right? You're saying you kind of walked down that path mentally and maybe in conversations of bringing somebody else in. Okay, well, what would that mean? And then that brought another thought pattern. And what would that mean? But wait a second. And then you kind of did some internal work. Like, well, I feel called to, Debbie and I feel called to stay here. Wait a second. And so the discernment was like this internal workings and also having conversations with people. And it just didn't seem to align with you or with others. There was community agreement as well, sort of leadership agreement. Yeah.
And I think it was a little more blurry at that time.
For sure.
But I would say I do know that feeling. Philippians where it talks about let the peace of Christ rule your heart. My best way to say, if you summarize all that information, I didn't have a peace that was ruling my heart. I felt like a bit of a check, but really didn't have a vision for what that difference would be.
Okay. So take us to the next step. You're here. You don't know what the vision is. You don't pretend to have all of the answers. You and the leadership are in this position where we're pretty sure we're not going to bring somebody else in. Okay, I don't know if that language is accurate or not, but okay, if we're not going to, then what?
Right.
Take us to that.
Yeah, and this was really a group effort because I think we got a group of people together and think we're kind of like, we're not sure what to do next. We kind of did exactly what we just said just now. So we decided, hey, why don't we come up with a group that can help figure out a structure that works for right now, like with the team we have, right? How would that work if we went to something that wouldn't be just driven by just one person at senior pastor level? And so that's where the LSAT, which we still regretted that name, but that's what it came down to, that team that will allow to leadership assess. What is it? Leadership strategy assessment team.
Leadership. I always thought it was like
structure.
Leadership SWAC, but that's the
I know. That's the thing. So anyway, so
that leadership structure
assessment team.
Yeah. Okay.
Leadership structure. So we said that's anyway. Our acronyms are hilarious.
Do you want to reveal who came up with that name?
No, I won't mention the name. Okay. Caleb Chow. Yeah. All right. So
don't say Caleb.
All right. So anyway, so we have this group to get together, and so we just get a group of the leaders together, and I'm a part of it too. And at the time, I felt like, I should be a part of this because I can really help out. I've had some experience.
A little bit.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, I'll be a part of it. And so when we first started meeting, it was really odd for me because quite honestly, I know I'm on my way out, right? I know that we're trying to do this together. Sure. And so I just tried to be quiet most of the time. And then it just was difficult. So we actually had a time
Wait a second.
Yeah. Good.
You tried to be quiet?
Oh no, it's tough. It was tough. So I did my best.
Was your head like
exploding?
You red?
Are you
like
mocking
smoke coming
me?
out of your ears?
So yeah. So
maybe.
So I think what I realized is because I knew I needed to not.
Yeah. Sure.
I should be not the first person to speak,
yes.
right? But then it also just created a dynamic. So we kind of went to a place where someone said, should David be here? And I thought, oh, wouldn't that be great if I didn't have to be here? Because I just trust this group of people. I really do. And I don't know if I was causing something to be awkward in them diving in and really seeking God together on the next structure. And so we prayed about it, and I felt, I would have a lot of peace. And they said, well, it feels odd, but I kid, they kicked me out. I actually think it was really important. So I stepped out. I was a pastoral person that anybody could go to in that process. If there's some things they just got stuck on, they could call me, we could talk, and I would check in, and I would hear all their notes and all this different things going on, but I wasn't in any of the meetings.
Probably not all their notes.
There's a few meetings I'm sure I might have been brought up in.
There were a couple notes they talked about you, and they're like, David doesn't need to hear that.
It's right.
It's fine. It's fine.
But no, it's really, I completely trust this group. And
Absolutely.
So they began this process of trying to, I guess everybody might have had different things. My view is like, give them 6-9 months. We'll have a pretty cool structure. Sure. We can just structure something that would work. And so that's what we were hoping for. But it didn't happen because they got to a point where they were people who had been already friends, had good relationships, could work together in team quite a bit. So I thought, well, this is just a team thing. Right. But the difference was this is a pretty important decision. They said, we need to make sure we're actually listening to God on this because this is shaping the direction of the church. So it just put another level on it. And so what they found, at least, again, I wasn't in all the meetings, but I know this process is that basically they weren't as good at seeking God together as they thought they were.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that brought them into a new phase.
Right.
Right in the church. So I remember we came in 2021, and soon thereafter we had like a family meeting, I think we called it. LSAT gave a report that was really kind of like nebulous, and like the basic message was we started the LSAT leadership structure assessment team to come up with a new structure that was kind of team oriented and all of this. And then we got into it and we're like, I think God's doing something deeper than that.
Right.
Like his goal for this group is not for us to come up with a structure.
Right.
His goal for this group, we think, is something about discernment and like how we even seek his face together.
Right.
Like that's bigger and broader and deeper. So take us into that phase when that turned from we're going to assess the structure and come up with a structure to we're going to learn how to discern in community.
Right. Yeah. And I think that my first reaction was I trust it was God. Yeah. I was a little internally frustrated because I thought, I just want to get this thing thought through. I want to get a plan. I want to get a plan going, But I think this is God. And so I kind of went with that and just started praying as we went along. Then they said, we need help on this. Because I would guess, here's what I say a lot of times when I explain the difference. We were already operating in pretty healthy team leadership. Like, the idea of like, you're in a meeting and you say, hey, what about this structure? Oh no, what about this structure? And whoever has the best plan kind of wins, or we adjust a little bit. You adjust to that person. Oh, I can accept that. It was still, God still used it, but this wasn't that. This was all of them trying to listen together and then share what's going on. And so they realized we're really good at team, but we're not really good at knowing how to be listening to Jesus together, right? We kind of go off in our corners and come back and talk. So there's a book called Pursuing God's Will Together. We want to go through this and see someone who's ahead of us on this. And that was just super helpful and kind of became a way of just teaching us how to practice this. And so that's where LSAT started getting traction and understanding that.
Yeah. And so deeper issues were coming up.
Right.
So tell us about, you weren't on the LSAT.
Yeah.
So you don't need to try to explain what they were doing or going through. We'll have them on these podcasts to share that. So you were part of what God was doing. You just didn't happen to be on that team.
Right.
So share a little bit about how you were kind of shepherding people and helping people move through process, whatever language you want to use, what God was doing through the book, through discussion, through pursuing God's will together phase of this.
Right. And I think for me, it was probably with me internally more than anything. I don't know how good a job I was doing in helping people through this process, because I was trying to grasp something that I wasn't right in the heart of, right? But I was watching the effect, and just because I'm already interacting with all these people all the time, and the way we approach things started becoming different. We'd already started doing things better as far as like how I was having quiet times before we got started in staff and having more prayer. So we'd already kind of been going somewhat this direction, but there's a kind of a model that I was trying to understand from a little bit of a distance. I read the book and things like that. It was helpful. But for me, a lot of it was just internally, because all my life I've been trained in this senior pastor model.
Right.
So it's deep in me how I think. And so that doesn't just switch, right? So I would come in with that kind of a way of thinking, and I could feel the clash with, no, we're looking at something just different. And so it was a learning process for me. And at first it was like, I think I was kind of like what else that went through. It's like, oh, this is harder than I thought. I thought I had such great relationship and it shouldn't be this difficult. But I did notice your internal things that you usually just cover over, you don't cover them over anymore. You pay attention to them. So if I'm in a meeting and something would happen and I would find myself feeling sad or mad or excited, I used to like just keep that inside, right? But now it's like, no, that's part of the process. And so the more I started learning, I got to get honest with how I'm feeling as we're trying to do this. That started to help me understand the model more.
Yeah. In those times where you're not necessarily in the team meetings, but you're interacting with people after the team meetings and things like that.
Yeah.
And just stay in that season for a bit and share a little bit more about what God was doing in you. You said it was new.
Right.
So just share a little bit about what was new about it for you.
Right.
And what was God doing in that?
That's a good question. And I have to think about this a little bit. I, as a senior pastor, you understand that because you have quite a bit of authority, you just don't say things that come to your mind very much, right? You hold things back, not to be deceitful, but to make sure that you're listening because you have quite a bit of authority. So you don't just share, I have a strong reaction to this, right? So this model was like very new for me.
From the book.
Yeah, from the book.
This is from the book.
Yeah, from the book, right? I think, I can see it. It all made sense as I read the book. It actually felt right even as I read the book, but I had never practiced.
It's different putting it into practice.
Very different.
This makes all this sense. And so just to parenthetically, I think everybody like you was like, you read the book and like, this isn't new to us. We've prayed together.
Oh, yeah.
We've listened to God together. Right. And so that's what I'm getting at in this is just keep sharing about how this was new.
Yeah. It felt both like this is more who we are than we are now as far as the structure. It felt like that because we've always wanted everybody to participate and have equal value. Right. And so this was really putting that into practice. I had a hard time because in my mind, a little bit of my baggage is I was in a leadership that was plurality of leadership where everybody was equal, supposedly. And
in a former church.
In a former church, yeah. And it was not good for me. And because we didn't understand what really that meant. Yeah. Being equal doesn't mean we're the same, right? It doesn't mean we even have the same maturity or we've had the same experience, that we're gifted in the same way. That's all very different degrees of authority, even in different areas. And so if that's not understood, then the person with the most authority ends up having the primary direction of the meeting, or they hold back all the time. And this was none of that. It was different than that. So because of that, I recognize I have a little bit of baggage going into this, because I've seen a model of leadership where people all get in a room and say, we're all the same. And yet I remember I was the youngest of other elders at this church that were experienced and much more mature and gifted in completely different areas than me. So I just tried to stay quiet because it didn't really work to share too much.
That's really interesting, because we all bring our baggage.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that part of this model? It goes beyond praying together and listening. It includes that. But as you're having like even conversations in the group, you're paying attention to what's happening in your mind or your heart or your gut. This model says that might be significant.
Right.
So share about how you set the stage for that, or how you've experienced that.
At first, the best way to explain it is I got triggered a lot internally.
Yeah, sure.
I'd find myself feeling stupid, or feeling like I don't know what to do here, or feel misunderstood internally, right? I'd look really good on the outside, but internally I'd have to kind of work that through a little bit. But what it was doing, it was the things within me that God wanted to free me from kind of got brought up a little bit. And so it wasn't just about, if I can pay attention, God's going to give me a better decision on this thing that we're talking about. It was way more than that. It was actually changing me in the process. And so the best way to describe it is you go through meetings and you have these little dings. We always call them, you have door dings and you have some head-on collisions sometimes, but they say something, you ding. And we've been really good as a church correcting things that when we whack each other or do something that's unkind to each other or sinful in a meeting. And so that was okay. So we got through that. This was a little different because it was more of when that was happening, instead of you just shutting it down and then trying to work out it later, you're able to say, hey, what's happening in this feeling I'm having? And is God saying something? And that's a whole different way of approaching it. So I think it does end up getting us to wiser choices as we make decisions with discernment. The wild thing is it's really transformative to the people who are in that process.
Yeah, that's right. And that gets at the heart of what's fundamentally different about this process, the way that I understand it, right? So take this a step further. If we're in a meeting and I get dinged, right? There's something going on in me. Now we're in a group where I get to say, hey, can we pause for a second? Because something's going on in me. I want to say it in a safe place.
Right.
That thing might not be completely relevant to the purpose of the meeting.
Often not, yes.
Right? But that's the old model.
Right.
This model is, but what is God doing in you right now? Because we as a group care about that.
Right.
Because God, surprise, surprise, cares about our hearts more than us building a program or working out a strategy.
Yeah, that's well put.
We're going to stop there for this episode, but join me in episode 4 to hear the conclusion of my conversation with lead pastor David Stark.